Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I will be discussing a new legendary creature from Throne of Eldraine, Kenrith the Returned King. Kenrith is a 5/5 white human noble for 4 generic and 1 white. However, since he has every mana symbol in his text box, he has a 5-color commander identity. With his first ability, you pay 1 red to give all your creatures haste. In this particular deck, this ability could be critical to winning, but we'll discuss it in greater detail later on. With his second ability, you pay 1 generic and 1 green to give a +1/+1 counter to any creature. In this deck, this ability is seldom used, if at all. That being said, with enough mana, you could make Kenrith big enough to make him scary. With his third ability, you pay 2 generic and 1 white to make target player gain 5 life. While seldom used in the deck, if games drag on, then it's a good mana sink in order to gain enough life to get back from the brink of death. With his fourth ability, you pay 3 generic and 1 blue to make a player draw a card. This ability is very relevant to winning with the deck. Either way, even if it weren't relevant to winning, you have a mana sink to draw a card. With his final ability, you pay 4 generic and 1 black to reanimate any creature onto its owner's battlefield. This is also one of the key abilities to the deck, but I'll get into that later on. Fortunately, getting Kenrith online isn't entirely necessary to win with this deck. Kenrith is actually a backup plan in case the main route to victory is disrupted by opponents. Also, starting the game with Kenrith in the command zone doesn't really give opponents a clear map of how you're going to be piloting your deck. However, as the title and thumbnail of this video suggests, this particular Kenrith build is a Hermit Druid combo deck. So I will begin by explaining how to pilot it and then explaining how to protect the combo and alternate ways to victory in case the combo is disrupted. That way the deck avoids being a glass cannon. When you pay 1 green and tap Hermit Druid, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a basic land. That goes to your hand and the rest of the cards go to the graveyard. In this deck, there are no basic lands, meaning that activating Hermit Druid essentially completely mills you out. Although I will mention every card in the deck throughout the video, the main cards to keep track of entering your graveyard are Dread Return and Angel of Glory's Rise. You can flash back Dread Return for 0 mana, but you need to sacrifice 3 creatures. One of them is clearly Hermit Druid. The other 2 are any creatures you've no doubt had in play since the deck runs 32 creatures. Anyways, when casting Dread Return, target Angel of Glory's Rise. Almost all of the deck's creatures are humans, so being able to resolve this is crazy. However, the most important humans entering the battlefield are Laboratory Maniac with either Bazaar Trade Mage or Seasoned Pyromancer. It should be clear that either Bazaar Trade Mage or Seasoned Pyromancer entering the battlefield will have us draw from an empty deck, but when we try to, we win because we have Lab Man in play. Okay, so if Kenrith is practically a red herring and the true commander of the deck is a lowly Hermit Druid, how do we consistently pull this off if Hermit Druid is buried in the 99? Well, the deck is running ways to filter the top cards of the deck to dig for Hermit Druid with humans like Courageous Outrider and Foul Emissary. When Courageous Outrider enters the battlefield, you look through the top 4 cards of your library and can reveal any human card there. You put it in your hand and then bottom deck the rest. Since Hermit Druid is a human, it shouldn't be a problem. But since 91% of the creatures in the deck are humans, you can still get a creature with it. When Foul Emissary enters the battlefield, it does something similar to Courageous Outrider, but you can choose any creature. It's not limited to just humans. Besides filtering through the top of the deck to find Hermit Druid, you can also just straight up tutor for it with humans like Imperial Recruiter and Recruiter of the Guard. Since Hermit Druid is a 1/1, both of these creatures can tutor for it when they enter the battlefield. You can also just draw into the deck until you find it. One such draw engine is Chulane Teller of Tales. Being a human makes Chulane ideal for this deck. Not only that, but every time we cast a creature spell, we draw a card and drop a land into play. Since 32 out of 99 cards in the deck are creatures, Chulane can definitely pull his weight. Similarly, Guardian Project will draw you a card whenever any non-token creature from the deck enters the battlefield. Notwithstanding, don't forget that the deck also has card draw in the form of Kenrith, which is always available in the command zone. Other ways of digging through the deck is with the previously mentioned Bazaar Trade Mage and Seasoned Pyromancer. So let's get into greater detail about these looting effects. Bazaar Trade Mage draws 2 cards when it enters the battlefield, even though you have to discard 3 when it does, and Seasoned Pyromancer can draw you 2 cards after you discard 2. The good thing about this card is that if you don't have 2 cards to discard, you still get to draw 2 cards. So even though these cards are used as part of the main win con, they can still be used to dig through the deck. Magus of the Wheel is quite literally Wheel of Fortune on a body. Other looting spells include classics like Faithless Looting, Tormenting Voice, Wild Guess, Frantic Search, and Cathartic Reunion, as well as newcomer Thrill of Possibility. When compared to the others, Frantic Search might cost more, but since it untaps 3 lands, it's technically free. This and Thrill of Possibility are the best ones since they can be cast at instant speed. However, the best looting card in the deck is Izzet Charm. Not only can it be used as a 2-costed instant speed looting effect for 2 cards, but it can also be used as a counterspell to protect our combo from counter magic. But we'll get into those types of cards later on. Although it's hard to top looting at instant speed for just 2 mana, the best cards for the job are Wheels, which is why the deck runs Windfall and Wheel of Fortune. Even though Wheel of Fortune will always guarantee us 7 cards, Windfall has the possibility of drawing us more than 7 cards, although it could just as well draw us less. This begs the question as to why looting wheeling and using creature-based draw, looting, filtering, and tutoring when the deck could just run Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, etc. Well, for one thing, we don't want to have key cards like Angel of Glory's Rise and Dread Return stuck in our hand. We want to be able to discard these in case they aren't milled with Hermit Druid. It's also why the deck runs Tireless Tribe as a free discard outlet. Tireless Tribe is the best for this particular brew because it's super cheap to cast at 1 white mana and its discard ability costs 0 to activate. Oh, and it's also a human. The reason the other cards are humans is because of the synergy surrounding humans. Since their abilities stuck to a creature, more creatures means more triggers for Chillane and Guardian Project. But perhaps the most important reason is the fact that they provide bodies for Dread Return. Dread Return's flashback cost requires sacrificing 3 creatures, and if you cast creatures to generate mana, filter, draw, loot, or tutor, then it's more consistent to cast Dread Return for its flashback cost. Granted, you can always use Kenrith's last ability to reanimate Angel of Glory's Rise from the graveyard, but that would have to be when the game is more grindy and or you aren't able to resolve Dread Return. So the reason these cards are included over straight and to the point tutors is synergy. Alright, so having established that, let's further discuss all this synergy in the deck. Since we want to be able to combo out faster than our opponents, the deck is running a fairly diversified ramp portfolio in order to buffer against multiple forms of disruption. It's running mana rocks in the form of Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, and Mana Vault. These also help with getting an early commander casting since Kenrith has 4 generic mana in his casting cost. The deck also runs cheap ramp spells like Farseek and Nature's Lore. Since my brew is running all 10 duels and all 10 shocks, these can essentially mana fix for any color. The deck's also running all 10 fetch lands to help mana fixing even further. As mentioned in my previous videos, you don't need to run dual lands, fetch lands, or Moxen in your own decks if you're on a budget. You can easily swap these out and still have the same type of deck. These lands and rocks simply provide speed and consistency. The deck's also running a couple of mana dorks like Avacyn's Pilgrim, Drover of the Mighty, Harabras Druid, and Noble Hierarch. Although technically not a mana dork, Crowsand Restorer is included since it can untap a land, but can untap up to 3 when we have Threshold. In a deck constantly looting, wheeling, fetching, and discarding, Threshold is pretty much guaranteed. The reason I'm running these over Bloom Tender, Birds of Paradise, Faber or Elder, etc. is because of the human creature type. If I had to cast Reanimate Angel of Glory's Rise in a rush, these creatures would enter the battlefield and thus provide some massive mana advantage, especially if they get haste thanks to Kenrith's first ability. The deck also runs Phyrexian Altar to generate mana as well. However, the altar isn't included simply for that. It's also a free sacrifice outlet. If you need to reuse a creature's ability, you can sacrifice it to the altar and then reanimate it later on for value. In fact, it's part of the alternate win cons of the deck. That alternate win con can be done in various ways. One of them being having Sir Conrad the Grim in play. For sake of argument, let's say the game got grindy and your opponents have been disrupting your plays. Maybe they've gone so far as dealing with Hermit Druid and or Dread Return. Not to worry, Sir Conrad is here. Not only can Sir Conrad mill everyone at the table for 1 generic and 1 black, but he also makes all opponents lose 1 life whenever any of our other creatures die or goes to the graveyard from anywhere else or leaves the graveyard to anywhere else. If the game has gone on long enough, you can use Sir Conrad to ping opponents with how the deck operates as normal, looting, self-milling, discarding, etc. However, that might be too slow in some pods. Well, remember how I said Phyrexian Altar was part of an alternate win con? Well, the other is Fiend Hunter. Here's how it goes. With Fiend Hunter in the graveyard, Angel of Glory's Rise entering the battlefield will return it to play, along with all the other humans you might have there. When Fiend Hunter enters the battlefield, exile your own Angel of Glory's Rise with it. Then sacrifice Fiend Hunter to Phyrexian Altar, returning the angel to the battlefield, which then returns the Fiend Hunter to the battlefield, which then exiles the angel. You're now back to where you started. Not only can this generate infinite mana which can be sunk into Kenrith to make all opponents draw their entire decks and lose, but it also has infinite triggers for Sir Conrad. Not just when the Fiend Hunter dies, but when it leaves the graveyard as well. So you get to kill opponents twice as fast. Besides Sir Conrad, this infinite combo can also use Zulaport Cutthroat for the same effect. What's great about these creatures is that they're all humans. What's great about Zulaport Cutthroat in particular is that it can be tutored with Imperial Recruiter and Recruiter of the Guard. What's great about Sir Conrad the Grim is that if he's in play before we go off with Hermit Druid, we can deal a serious blow to the whole table, maybe even enough to win just off of that. For every creature milled with Hermit Druid, Sir Conrad takes 1 life away from each opponent. But then, when Angel of Glory's Rise is reanimated, he takes 1 life away for each creature being reanimated, plus the 3 creatures sacrificed to Dread Return's flashback cost, plus the Angel herself. That way, if we have Laboratory Maniac or the humans that draw us cards when they enter the battlefield dealt with, we can still win off of Sir Conrad. If Phyrexian Altar is out of the picture, we still have 1 more sacrifice outlet in the form of Sadistic Hypnotist. Even if we don't use the Hypnotist as a way to infinitely combo with Fiend Hunter and Angel of Glory's Rise, it's still a good way to force players to discard cards from their hand, especially players who you infer have responses in them. On the topic of disruption is key if we want our combo to survive against opponents' answers, and Sadistic Hypnotist isn't our only answer to answers. Dosan the Fallen Leaf and Grand Abolisher straight up prevent opponents from casting spells during our turn. Grand Abolisher has the added bonus of preventing players from activating abilities from artifacts, creatures, and enchantments during our turn. Again, these creatures benefit the deck even more since they're humans. Other ways of preventing opponents from doing things to us is with Sigarda, Heron's Grace, and Sylvan Safekeeper. Although not a human, Sigarda gives hexproof to all our humans as well as ourselves. Sylvan Safekeeper can give Shroud to any creature for free at the cost of sacrificing a land. Together they can protect each other and thus our other creatures. Another way to protect our creatures is to prevent them being countered. Cavern of Souls will basically always be used for humans, which is yet another reason why the main strategy of the deck is built on the foundation of humans. At least Hermit Druid can be countered when using the Cavern to cast it. Then you just have to worry about protecting it while it's on the battlefield. But that's what Sigarda and Sylvan Safekeeper were for. Venser, Shaper Savant, and Reflector Mage can be used to bounce things back to opponents' hands. Reflector Mage prevents that opponent from recasting that creature during their next turn. Venser has Flash and can be used to return a spell to its owner's hand as well, which is pretty useful since that bypasses uncounterable spells. Again, these being human makes them all the better in the deck. Along the same vein as Sadistic Hypnotist, Sin Collector at least lets you look at an opponent's hand in order to exile an instant or sorcery from there. Given the situation, you could use a sacrifice outlet and Kenrith to continuously sacrifice, reanimate Sin Collector in order to make sure opponents don't have a hand before going off. In case opponents are able to cast things our way and try to interrupt us, I do have a couple of counterspells in the deck. Delay, Dispel, Negate, Pact of Negation, and Swan Song. I chose the easiest and cheapest counterspells because the deck wins in the same turn it goes off. We simply have to ensure that victory. Since we go off during our own turn, only instants would be able to deter us. That's why Dispel, Swan Song, and Negate aren't included. Delay in this case is better than a card like Counterspell or Mana Drain, since those require double blue and this is a 5-colored deck. Delay works since the game will be over before that opponent gets their spell unsuspended. Pact of Negation is a no-brainer since we don't need to worry about its delay trigger, and even if we do have to pay for it, it won't hinder our progress that much because that would mean that we'd be taking the longer route to victory anyways. You might notice that Force of Will and Force of Negation are absent from the deck. Being 5-colored means that it won't be as likely to have a blue card in our hand to pitch to these cards in order to cast them for free. Either way, Force of Negation can only be cast for free outside of our own turn, and it's during our own turn that we need protection. Although not technically a counterspell, casting Silence during your turn before you start going off will prevent anyone from casting anything during your turn, so it's like you're countering spells before they're even being cast. Other ways of dealing with our opponents is a bit extreme. Since this is a combo deck, if we end up with a slow start or become the arch enemy, then desperate times might call for desperate measures. Since we don't mind having our creatures end up in the graveyard, I'm running Damnation, Supreme Verdict, and Wrath of God for good measure. The deck also runs the greatest one-sided reset button to date, Cyclonic Rift. Overloading this might solve a lot of problems for us. Even though this next card isn't one-sided, Hour of Revelation is a bit more permanent when it comes to solutions for unfavorable board states. And what if the match is quite the slobber knocker and people are attacking left and right, interacting left and right, and you're in for the match of the century? If it drags on and people are spending their resources dealing with threats, we need to have ways to duplicate our responses and key cards via recursion. This is why the deck runs Archaeomancer, Eternal Witness, and Treasure Hunter. When Archaeomancer enters the battlefield, it returns an instant or sorcery from our graveyard to our hand, preferably a board wipe or counterspell. When Treasure Hunter enters the battlefield, it returns an artifact from our graveyard to our hand, preferably Phyrexian Altar if we need to use that for an alternate win con. When Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, then it can return any card to our hand. Notice that all three of these creatures happen to be human, which, as mentioned throughout the entirety of the video, is an extremely useful and synergistic creature type to have in this deck. Another way to recover our cards is with Elixir of Immortality. When used in response to our graveyard getting exiled, we can save our key cards. In my opinion, Elixir of Immortality should be considered for inclusion in any graveyard-themed deck. Alright, so before you start thinking that Kenrith as the commander is just an afterthought, keep in mind that with infinite mana, which the deck can produce, he's a win con in the command zone. Also, his last ability helps take over Dread Return's job when in a pinch. But, as mentioned in the beginning of the video, Kenrith is a Swiss Army knife of abilities. With his first abilities, all the creatures that enter the battlefield from the graveyard gain haste. That means that you can tap down mana dorks for mana, as well as turning all those creatures sideways to take out some opponents. You can also use his draw ability to dig through the deck. And if it turns out that you have become the arch enemy and opponents have been dwindling your life and you are on the ropes, he can gain you life too. Since these abilities can add up to quite the mana investment, the deck is running Hearthstone, Training Grounds, and a third and final non-human creature of the deck, Biomancer's Familiar. These cards are included in order to reduce Kenrith's activated cost to just their colored mana or as close to that as possible. This makes it easier to use his abilities and be efficient with what you're doing. For example, if his reanimating ability were to only cost 1 black, you could have infinite reanimations with Phyrexian Altar and a creature, preferably the creature you want to be infinitely reanimating. Or, with any other creature, this becomes a win con with Zulaport Cutthroat or Sir Grim on the battlefield. On the topic of mana, the rest of the deck is just City of Brass, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Mana Confluence, and Reflecting Pool. It should be noted that Hermit Druid isn't the most broken way to build around Kenrith. I had a Saskia the Unyielding deck where the purpose of the deck was wheeling, self-milling, and discarding until getting the pieces needed to get Angel of Glory's Rise into play and reanimate my entire graveyard. This included humans that gave haste to all my creatures, pump them, and give them some form of evasion in order to win after reanimating my entire graveyard. It wasn't a glass cannon either, since most of the cards could be hard casted and you could play the deck until you set it up. However, with Kenrith, I saw the potential of having the same deck, but with the availability of blue, I could win without worrying about combat damage thanks to cards like Laboratory Maniac. Since Kenrith himself can reanimate Angel of Glory's Rise with his last ability, I don't have to worry so much about Dread Return getting dealt with. With enough mana, I can pay his ability and just resurrect the Angel that way. With access to blue, I can also run counter magic to make the deck more resistant to control decks. So I evolved my Saskia deck into a Kenrith deck. However, the most prominent cEDH one is just getting infinite mana as quickly as possible and winning that way. You can technically accomplish this with turn 0 Flash Hulk. You'd need the following God Hand: Leyline of Anticipation, Flash, Protean Hulk, Mana Crypt, Mox Opal, Mana Vault, Elvish Spirit Guide, Simian Spirit Guide, or Lion's Eye Diamond would work also in Elvish Spirit Guide's place. At the beginning of the game, reveal the Leyline and begin with it on the battlefield. Then, before any player even starts their turn, cast Mana Crypt and Mox Opal. Tap Mana Crypt to cast Mana Vault. Use that remaining mana and tap Mox Opal to cast Flash, putting Protean Hulk into play after resolving. Don't pay for the Hulk and let it get sacrificed to Flash's claws. Then, search your library for Tribute Mage and Spell Seeker. When these enter the battlefield, Tribute Mage will tutor for Isochron Scepter, and Spell Seeker will tutor for Dramatic Reversal. Tap the Mana Vault to cast Isochron Scepter and imprint Dramatic Reversal on it. Exile Elvish Spirit Guide from your hand and use the remaining mana to activate the Scepter. This will untap Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, and, most importantly, Mox Opal for that colored mana. This will generate infinite mana, which you can use to cast Kenrith from the command zone and sink it all into him to force all opponents to draw out their decks, thus winning you the match. Even if you don't manage to get a God Hand, there are innumerable ways of getting infinite mana in a 5-colored deck, as well as having access to every legal tutor. So you can realistically and consistently construct an infinite mana engine, as well as having cards in hand to protect your combo and win con. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Kenrith the Returned King. You don't need to build a cEDH deck around Kenrith, and you could just as easily build literally any other deck with him because he has a 5-color color identity and he has a Swiss Army knife of abilities. However, I chose to evolve my kooky Hermit Druid reanimator deck with Kenrith at the helm instead of Saskia. If you want more cEDH info on Kenrith, you can also go to the cEDH TV channel. Mons has a great deck tech video on Infinite Mana Kenrith. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.